whenever I learned history before that, which is mostly modern Western civilization, we kind of start around this 1500s sort of period, and we go from there as if civilization didn't exist before then. And a lot of Protestant communities that I was participating in, and I'm not at all saying they're wrong. I'm not trying to judge them, so please forgive me if it sounds that way. There's this idea of going back to the apostolic tradition or the golden era, which is the time of the apostles during the Acts, or what we read during Acts and the epistles. And for me, it always seemed weird that there was this huge gap of history that we denied. What happened there? What happened between 100 AD and 1600 AD? And the understanding I had then was that, well, the Catholic Church was reigning, which wasn't the fact, because that didn't happen until the 11th century. So again, what happened in those 1,000 years? Where were the Christians? What were they doing? What did that look like? Why don't we know anything about them?
Well, hello, everyone. This is Max with the Orthodox Christian Podcast, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Macrina Hall. And for those that are watching or listening, Macrina, why don't you take a second to tell us who you are, a little bit about what you do every day.
Hello, my legal name is actually Micah. I'm known in the church as Macrina. I work as an RMT, or a registered massage therapist, in my life outside the church. I bake. I'm a grandmother of 2, even though I don't look it. And otherwise, I spend all my extra time at church. So I don't do much outside.
That's wonderful. And you joined the Orthodox Church at a certain point. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your religious background and what led to the point of encountering the Orthodox Church, Macrina?
Yeah, for sure. I did not grow up in a church-going household. I don't even know if we ever talked about church or anything like that. My first encounter was at a summer camp in Ontario where I grew up, and I heard the name Jesus for the first time. That wasn't a curse word. And I was very interested and started attending 1,000 youth groups, whatever I could get to. That eventually led to me attending Trinity Western University in Langley, British Columbia. And it was there actually that I heard about the Orthodox Church for the first time from one of my theology teachers. He had challenged us to attend a church with a tradition different from anything we had experienced before. And because of all my church hopping, I had been to every Protestant church that existed at the time. And my stepmother was Catholic, so I'd been to the Catholic church, and there was this little Orthodox church just down the road from the school, and I'm like, well, might as well go there. I can walk there. So when I went there, it was a really surreal experience. I remember walking into the building, and the very first thing I felt was like I had come home, which I couldn't explain because I didn't really know anything about it. We ended up going my friends and I went 3 weeks in a row. And then I got really ruffled because I couldn't take communion, and kind of, went a variety of other paths for a few years. And eventually it came to a point where I thought, well, I only have 2 choices based on my studies and what I was learning. I have a degree in Christianity and culture, which essentially is church history and theology. And I couldn't deny what I was seeing, what I was reading and experiencing, both through the church and through life. And I had to decide, okay, well, I got to be Catholic or I got to be Orthodox. Those are my only 2 choices. I cannot be Protestant anymore. It doesn't sit right in me. And after some really good talks with both professors and priests, I decided to become Orthodox. Although even that took a little bit, because all my friends were becoming Orthodox at the time. And I'm like, well, I don't want to look like I'm just doing it because they're doing it. So I think I came about 2 years after most of them did. Eventually, with my husband, we were received together. around Christmas, 2007. So it's been a while.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you went to that first youth group and heard the name of Jesus that wasn't in a curse word, did you join one of these churches and maybe walk us through a little bit the journey towards Christianity to begin with before the leap into Orthodoxy?
Yeah, I was how old was I? I was maybe like 11 when I went to this church, or sorry, I went to camp. It was a horse camp. That was just like a Bible camp. And my mom didn't know that. She's like, "Oh, they have horses. You'll probably like that," cuz I really didn't like anything else. I wasn't athletic. I wasn't in clubs, so um I loved camp. I was there for 2 weeks. And I remember I came home and I told my mom I want a Bible. And she's like, "Okay, I don't know why, but sure." So I got a Bible, and then I went to camp for 4 years before my mom and stepdad got married. And then they had an Anglican rector, I guess he's called. He performed their ceremony. And I asked him, I'm like, "Hey, do you have a youth group? Because I want to go." And he said, "Sure, we do." So just through that connection, I started going to that youth group. And it was, I don't know, I don't really like talking about it because I feel pretentious when I say it, but I remember being there with that group and thinking something's missing. Like we're still, I don't know, we're just young people hanging out, and they kind of talk about the Bible and Christian principles, but not really. And the youth leader was involved in some things that don't need to be discussed. So I thought, I can't be here anymore. I got to leave this youth group and find another one. But through camp, I had made a lot of friends who lived in my city and in neighboring cities. And so I just started exploring all the youth groups. And it was like, it was like I was starved and I was so hungry. I just wanted to consume from whatever source was available to me. But yeah, I think at one point I was part of 7 youth groups, like officially part of them, and attending 7 days a week. My mom was scared. She thought I was in a cult, which is funny because all I ever did was sit in my room and read my Bible. And I learned to play guitar, and I played guitar a lot and sang in my room. Like I was such a peaceable teenager, but I was the one she was worried about. So, yeah, yeah, eventually I did. I wasn't joining a church because on Sundays we had family commitments, so it was hard for me to get there. Um, but when I was 17, I moved out into a house with this lady and her daughter. They lived in another city, and I joined their church because they had a really large youth group that had this amazing interchurch connection with the other youth groups in the city. So it was really nice to be connected with other people my own age and to have this common desire to love and serve God and to learn more and to grow. And the pastoral community was really good. So I was there for a year and a half while I lived with that family. And it was really, really enriching. And at the time, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. It was just once I went to Trinity that I started actually learning about our church history and where we came from and those sorts of things that, that started kind of destabilizing things a little bit, which is scary. But I mean, you kind of got to go through that a little bit to find where you're going. I hope that answered your question. Sorry, I ramble.
No, no, that's very helpful. And so, was there a certain point in there? It sounds like it became quite serious at a certain point. Was there a specific event or something that made you think, yes, now I am a Christian? I mean, it's a unique story in the sense that
Yeah.
you were going to so many youth groups, but then weren't going to the Sunday gatherings for
Yeah.
a number of years. But was there a sort of a transition point for you, or was it just more of a gradual journey?
It was it was a gradual point, if that makes any sense. I wasn't a happy child. Well, no, I was a happy child. I wasn't a happy teenager. I don't know many teenagers who are happy, but we had some stuff going on at home, and I was not very secure in my being. And I had a moment where I figured it would probably be better if I wasn't alive, and it would serve the world better if I wasn't here, because whatever. And I remember, I know we're not supposed to bargain with God, but I remember that night, and I was in a moment of personal crisis, and this isn't when it happened, just for reference, but this is where it started. And I said to God, if you can show me that life is worth living and that there's something to live for, I'm yours. I'm yours forever. I mean, the funny thing is now I know I'm his forever anyways, but it's the acknowledging and our participation in our faith. And so I kind of put the ball in God's court and said, all right, it's up to you, because I'm done. I'm done with all of this. And I gotta say, through camp that summer, that happened in the spring, and that summer had to be one of the most beautiful summers I experienced at camp. So many wonderful, loving people just came into my life, and we connected really well. And by the end of the summer, God had poured so much love into me that I couldn't deny he had answered my question, because it was very direct. But again, it was a bit of a process, and I had to go through all of that to see that. And and that's where I'm like, all right, I'm yours. Now what do we do? And I think that's when I started joining the youth groups, was around that time.
Okay. And if there's anyone listening or watching that finds themselves in a similar place, or struggles with some of those thoughts from time to time, do you have any practical steps that someone in that situation could take to reframe where they are and get out of that situation?
I don't know how I would say find the part of you that is most connected to reality and to the earth, which sounds weird, and root yourself down on that until the storm blows over, because it's a storm, and it's not easy to ride the waves, but the waves will calm, and then you'll be able to move after that. And then there is someone, even if it's just one, there is one person in your life who loves you, whether you know it or not. There is someone. And that was my anchoring hope, is the one person I thought, well, if I did this, that would make them sad. And so it was just that kind of tethered me to this life. And then God took it the rest of the way.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful advice.
Talk to a stranger. If you're worried about talking to someone maybe not a stranger on the bus, but like find someone and get it out of your body. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Very helpful advice. So, fast forwarding a little bit, you went through these youth groups, eventually started attending a Sunday gathering as well as the youth groups, and then at a certain point went to Trinity Western and discovered historical Christianity, which was problematic, but also it sounds kind of exciting. So what were the reasons that you thought you couldn't be a Protestant anymore, but you were open to Orthodoxy or Catholicism? What changed for you?
I think it was this idea that we have a history that goes beyond the 16th century, and I think whenever I learned history before that, which is mostly modern Western civilization, we kind of start around this 1500s sort of period, and we go from there as if civilization didn't exist before then. And a lot of Protestant communities that I was participating in, and I'm not at all saying they're wrong, I'm not trying to judge them, so please forgive me if it sounds that way. There's this idea of going back to the apostolic tradition, or the golden era, which is the time of the apostles during the Acts, or what we read during Acts and the epistles. And for me, it always seemed weird that there was this huge gap of history that we denied. What happened there? what happened between 100 AD and 1600 AD. And the understanding I had then was that, well, the Catholic Church was reigning, which wasn't the fact, because that didn't happen until the 11th century. So again, what happened in those 1,000 years? Where were the Christians? What were they doing? What did that look like? Why don't we know anything about them? And even at Trinity, most of the history that we learned was, again, we learned about the split in, 1056 or something like that, from Catholicism and the Eastern Church, they called it. They didn't even call it the Orthodox Church. And then we end up in the Reformation. It just felt so vacant of activity and of life, and the life of the church is constantly going. So I remember talking to my teacher about that. Fabulous man. His name is Craig Allert. I teased him even when I saw him a few years ago. I'm like, I don't understand why you're not Orthodox. Like, you are one of the most Orthodox people I know, and yet you're not Orthodox. He's like, yeah, well. And he's the one who introduced Orthodox literature into our curriculum and reminded us that, hey guys, just so you know, there's this other tradition that no one knows about, no one talks about. So you guys need to know about it, and we need to talk about it because they're part of our greater ecumenical community. And when I started reading about it, I thought, wait a second, where did they come from? How come we don't see them? Why don't we talk about them? And that's where it started. It's all his fault. But then there were other things. I was part of a community that denied the Nicene Creed, said, well, it's not really relevant to us this day. And I thought, but isn't the truth relevant regardless of date, time, region? Of course it's relevant today. And had discussions with some of the pastors, and slowly started seeing, the more I learned, the more I engaged with the things I was learning, and realizing there was a disconnect in our faith versus our history. And so that's when I started reading more. And I actually attended, there's a little college on Trinity campus that is Catholic run. And that's where we started learning about saints. Oh my gosh, who are these people? They're so cool. What miraculous, amazing lives they live. And again, why don't we have them? Gosh, they're so encouraging and inspiring, and they live these beautiful lives. Why don't we know about them? So it was just, I think it was one of those slowly seeing what we were missing in the Protestant church. And then I couldn't stay with that, because there was this richness and this beauty that was available. And why wouldn't I go live in that kind of thing? I don't know. It was a really, really cerebral process, I have to say. And a real wrestling, because the Orthodox Church is weird. We're a bit weird. These are weird. You get used to them, but it's hard to encounter that and be like, I don't know what's going on here, but it's beautiful and I can't understand it. Yeah.
And were there certain things, if you can drill down into what the historical nature of the Orthodox Church meant in terms of differences? So if you could compare the Orthodox Church to the Protestant Church, and what it meant practically that the Orthodox Church had this connection with the history of Christianity versus some of the Protestant churches you were going to that just went back as far as, say, like the 1500s. What did that mean on a day-to-day basis in terms of your faith and how you interacted with God?
That's a good and a tough question. And honestly, if you had asked me this 10 years ago, I would have been like, I don't know. Now, when I look at it now, and the way when looking back, there is a deep-rooted security, which is a real psychological term, and I don't like using it because I don't think it fully conveys everything. but there's a security in having a tradition, knowing that you're part of a community that has existed for a couple thousand years. And there's something profoundly real about it, if that makes any sense. And that there's kind of a, oh my gosh, now I'm all floating up here. There's some and I'll go the other way because I'm having trouble articulating that. With the Protestant church experience that I had, and I can't speak for everyone because I know we're all individuals. The experience I had as I matured as a person and as I grew out of Protestantism and grew into Orthodoxy, I found that the sense of what I was participating in was very emotion driven, which I find dangerous because our emotions fluctuate and are really fickle things. That historically, if you look at the Protestant church, it's founded on division and founded on going my way. Even though individualism wasn't really a thing then, if you look at things socially and where kind of society was starting to go, even philosophically, scientifically, it was moving into more of an independent drive than what we necessarily see in the Orthodox Church. We are a collective whole, and I love this idea that we are a collection of broken people working towards the same thing. And there's no expectation that I should be like you, should be like him, should be like her, anything like that, but that we're still all participants of one thing, as opposed to I go to this community. Yeah, we left that community. And that's probably, again, from my experience, a lot of division. And okay, well, this isn't really working out for me, so I'm just going to make my own church. We're going to go this way, and we're going to discard the things we don't like and just keep the things we do like. And I mean, that's not life. You can't. Life's full of things that are hard to swallow or hard to digest or even hard to encounter. And even Jesus said that to his disciple. When the disciple said, "This is a hard thing you're telling us," he's like, "I know. You can either stay with me or you can go. That's up to you." So I think did that answer your question? I feel like I was kind of going around it.
Yeah, no, I think that gets to this notion that there's something in the Protestant ethos that tends towards division, and that's matter of fact in the number of denominations that do exist.
Yeah.
And so there's potentially a fatal flaw there where it splinters easily. And so there was a sense of security, it sounds like, in the Orthodox Church where it's not going to break away in the same fashion. And the reason for that is probably because it has this long history. So you can actually look back over thousands of years and see continuity. There hasn't been as many breakaway movements, and that was reassuring to you, it sounds like.
Yeah, and you can also you can trust the experience of others in it too. I'm going through a this or whatever it is, and you're not alone. You have all of these people, saints in particular, but also the people that are in the greater community, and you have them kind of bolstering you, and you know that you're not alone in your struggle. I think about it most like when we're fasting. Gosh, that's hard. It's really hard to fast, especially in the world when it's such a pleasure-seeking existence. And how do I deny myself? Well, I mean, there are a couple 100,000 other people who are doing this now too. So, good. I'm glad I've got them, and look at the saints were able to do it and they still live. They didn't die from not eating meat for X amount of time. So, if they can do it, I can do it too. Kind of thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for those that are listening that might not be familiar with fasting in the Orthodox Church, because I think some people will define fasting as just abstinence, like no eating at all. Can you
Right.
talk a little bit about what fasting looks like in terms of the actual diet, but also the frequency in Orthodoxy for those that might be unfamiliar?
Yeah. So our fasting, it's we we calculated at one time it's about half the year we spend fast doing our fast, which is essentially eliminating animal products from your diet. So if you're thinking of it in worldly terms, you're eating something of a vegan diet. The idea also is that you're indulging less in pleasure foods and eating more simply so that we are able to direct our focus as opposed to feeding our pleasures onto feeding our soul and feeding ourselves with the word of God, um, and connecting with the Holy Spirit. So, yeah, a lot of lentils, a lot of beans, legumes, vegetables, a lot of bread. It doesn't always have to look like that. And then we have the two massive fasts, which last for average 40 days. We have one just before Christmas, one before Easter, which is the Great Fast, that has some other kind of shoulder fasts attached to it. We have we have two in the summer, right before we celebrate the apostles and the Dormition. So the repose of the Mother of God. And those are, well, the one for the apostles varies. Sometimes it's 3 days, sometimes it's 3 weeks. That one's nice because when it's 3 days, it's not so bad. The other one, the August fast, which is the one before the Mother of God's repose, that one is a fixed 2 weeks. Fasting can be challenging. It's not so hard in the winter. It's definitely hard in the summer when barbecues are going and that's like all you smell, but it's good. And then we also have prescribed fasting on Wednesdays and Fridays for those who have strength to do it, where again we participate in eating the same sort of foods.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful, I think, for people that may hear that Orthodox fast for half the year and they wonder, well, how can they not eat at all for half
Yeah,
the year and still
no,
exist?
yeah. Although some of the saints, they did pretty miraculous things with their not eating. I'm not a saint, so I don't do that.
Right. Yes, yeah. So you joined the Orthodox Church. There was this sense of historicity there. And I should ask as well, with the Protestant churches, did you eventually land on a particular denomination, or were you still checking out various ones until joining Orthodoxy?
No, I mean the church I was part of, they were called the Congregational Christian Church, and I don't even know what that means. It used to be part of the United Church, and then when the United Church or a portion of the United Church kind of factioned again because the United Church was made up of five denominations that wanted to come together again. So having this idea of being one, which we long for, um, then it was, well, I don't know, for those familiar with the United Church, it kind of like went really sideways. And then they kind of broke up, and some of these groups withdrew from that umbrella, and Congregational Christian Church was one of them. Again, I don't even know what that means. We learned about it in confirmation, and I quickly forgot about it. And then I was part of an Anglican church for a while because I liked the liturgical structure. There's something soothing in knowing where you're going every Sunday. Like when you have chaos and constant change in the world, it's really great to be able to have something that's consistent and you can rely on it. So I know we're going to start like this, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do that. And I can kind of settle myself in that, even if I can't be present. So it's funny because I was leaning towards more liturgically based Protestant churches while I was in university. the more I learned, liking that structure. Again, not having had exposure to it very much, or not understanding the word liturgical. I don't even know if I do understand the word liturgical, but I feel it. I know what it feels like. And it feels like having a rubric, which some people find stifling and holds them back because you don't have free expression. That's fair. It's a fair sentiment. But
Right. Yeah.
it's a very different experience. And again, there's that comfort in knowing what's coming next kind of thing, right?
Yeah. And I do think as well, there is a kind of freedom that comes through structure. And actually, I would argue that that's the truest form of freedom, in the sense that if you want to become good at piano or guitar, you've got to practice and put yourself
Right.
within a structured environment. And the only way you actually become proficient and have the skills to really flourish on that instrument is by going through that. And if you just give someone a guitar and say, well, play away, let's see what happens, it'll be maybe occasionally some little sparkles that come through, but in general, they'll miss out on all the lessons that have essentially been accrued throughout time that can be passed on to someone,
Right.
because people have figured out how the chords work and how the scales work, and they can just
Yeah.
fast forward that whole experience. And it kind of feels the same in the Orthodox Church or in other liturgical traditions where there is something that's been good that people have discovered or encountered, you might want to
Mhm.
say, in a Christian setting, and that's being passed down so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I don't know if that was your experience, but when I was journeying towards Orthodoxy, it felt like sometimes in more of the sort of quote unquote free Protestant churches that were more of a concert in terms of the music, and then a longer sermon of about 45 minutes, that it was reinventing the wheel. Like, we've
Right.
done this before, we've been down this path, and
Mhm.
we could just go with what the church has handed on, and we'll be a lot freer in that sense because we've got all these wonderful tools at our disposal. Was there something akin to that in your journey when you switched? Because it was, I imagine, quite a dramatic change from
Oh yeah.
the structure of the actual Sunday gathering to the Sunday gathering of the Orthodox.
Yeah. Yeah. I was in my younger years, I was a really emotional being. So I actually really loved the Protestant services because they carried me away. I loved the music. I loved dancing. I loved raising my hands. Sometimes I want to raise my hands in church, even now. And I'm like, we kind of do that here, but we don't really do that. So I'll hold on to my hands. I guess I don't have to, but I know that it's not common in our practice. So it was it was hard. I find it difficult to focus on things too, and like to be there. I'm not very good at being there, which is why I really liked being able to be physically active and participating in the services. So yeah, that was really hard to move from singing and clapping and raising your hands and dancing and stuff like that to, okay, we don't do that. It was okay. Like, it didn't, I don't know. It was a change I had to get used to. Although once you start to feel the rhythm of the service, I feel like I'm participating in it now. I still struggle because I still want to dance sometimes. Some of the music is really jubilant and joyous, and how can you not, right? It's a bodily expression of joy um, towards God and celebrating. But at the same time, it's understanding that there is an appropriateness and a place for that. And this space, this time, it's not about me. It's not about what I'm looking for and what I'm trying to get out of this. It's about me offering myself to God, which then He offers on the altar for us, and then we receive in return. So my offering to God is being here and doing my best to be present in this way, because it's not about what I'm getting out of this. It's about what I'm giving to God through this. That's
Mhm.
how I see it. So yeah, it was a struggle, and I've been to a couple Protestant churches over the last 10 years, and once I went with my husband and we're singing, I'm like, I remember this song. And I start clapping along. He said, what are you doing? Like, I'm singing. And it's kind of fun. He's like, this is not church. I'm like, it's not church the way we know it, no, but it's still kind of fun, you know.
Well, that's neat that you still have the appreciation for the things that
Yeah.
you went through formerly, because I know that's not necessarily always the case. Especially, I think at first when someone joins the Orthodox Church, it can be easy to demonize the past, or they might be running away from something. And I think there
Yeah.
are good reasons to switch from one to the other. However, there's also appreciation for what is there and the good
Yeah,
things that are on offer.
exactly.
So when you joined the Orthodox Church, were there other what were the challenges that you faced? I mean, it was quite new, quite different in terms of the practice. Okay, and so for anyone listening on the audio version, Macrina is pointing to the icons on the wall.
It's not even just the icon, it's the icon of the Mother of God. So I had
Okay, okay.
issue, I had big issues with the Theotokos. I mean, I know she's forgiven me. I still kind of struggle, but she was a huge barrier for me. And the icons were a big barrier for me because, we're taught do not make idols and we should worship no one but God. And I watched what people were doing in front of the icons, which is crossing themselves, bowing down, and kissing them. And I'm thinking, I don't know that I can participate in this. I was actually okay with everything, absolutely everything, except icons and the Mother of God, which are, I mean, you can live without icons, I suppose. I don't know that I could live without them now. You can't live without the Mother of God. I mean, she bore Christ, right? Uh, and I remember talking with one of the priests as I was exploring, and I said to him, okay, I got two big issues. Like they're really holding me back. I said, what's up with the icons? Like what's the deal with these? And he said, well, let me put it to you another way. Do you have pictures of family members on your desk or on your wall at home? I said, well, yeah, of course I do, because they all live in Ontario and I don't. Okay. Do you ever pick up those pictures and, out of affection, kiss them? I'm like, I'm not going to admit that I do, but yeah, of course I do. He goes, same thing. These are our beloved ones, and we revere them and we show honor to them by kissing the images of them, but we don't worship them. I'm like, oh, and I don't know why. I'm a super overthinker for some reason. Just the way he said that made perfect sense through my whole being. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's not an issue again. Well, what about like the Theotokos? Mary. I don't know about Mary. You got to help me on that one. He's like, and his response to me, he looked at me affectionately, but with a slightly puzzled look. He's like, she bore God. Don't you think that's pretty amazing? And she needs to be like honored for that. I said, well, I mean, I guess so. Yeah. He's like, no, I just want you to think about it. She bore God. She had God inside of her, and she grew him and tended to him as a child. Like she was the ultimate servant. And so she's honored above all others because of that. I'm like, well, when you put it that way, I guess it makes sense. So she wasn't a barrier anymore, but I was still very reluctant. I'd approach her icon and I'd look at her and I'm like, I don't know about you. I'm still having trouble with this. And I'd say hi and then I'd move on. I don't know why I had an easier time accepting the saints than I did the Theotokos. But I think part of that came from the Catholic community I was involved in at the time. And there is a pseudo worship that happens of Mary in Catholicism. I'm not saying all Catholics do that because I don't believe that, but the ones I was around and some of the literature I was reading through the classes I was taking, they interact with Mary on a very different scale. And it is akin to worship where she is almost more revered than Christ. I mean, she did give her life for him, but she didn't give her life for us. He gave his life for us, and he's the one who gave us life overall. So I think that's kind of what tainted my relationship with that, because I didn't want to be worshiping her because she's not God, and that's not right. But I have a soft spot for her now, and I'm not as scared of her as I used to be.
And with the icons, you mentioned that verse from the Ten Commandments, not making any graven image, and that often comes up
Yeah.
in response to any images that
Mhm.
maybe someone raised in the Protestant church will see. Was there a particular way that you were able to interpret that verse or overcome that section of the Bible to make it square with icons?
Yeah. I I don't I don't use them for worship. They're there to help me focus. And when I look at the images, I don't look at the image as a picture. It's not art, although there's some artistic element to it. I look at who's there and think about their life. So I think someone may have actually explained this to me at some point too. They direct me to worship of God by their example. So when I see, like, for example, I don't know, this one, John the Theologian. Yeah. When I look at that, I don't look at that and say, well, I don't know about the coloring. It's very brown. There's a lot of orange tones. Like, I'm not looking at it like that. I'm also not worshiping John. I'm looking at it going, why is he here on my wall? What did he wrote one of the gospels. Okay, what does that gospel show us? That gospel shows us how Christ is the light of the world. So his icon directs me to that. Or the icon of St. Herman. I think about St. Herman's life. What did he do? He forsook everything. He devoted himself in service to God through the Alouette people. What did he do for the people? What did that look like? And so they provide an opportunity for me to think about their lives and to see either how they point to God or how they give me an example of how to live a life that serves God either in the world or directed towards him. Because, I mean, both of them, St. Herman was a monk, and I mean, I'm not a monk. So how does he teach me anything? Well, he teaches me compassion for people who aren't like me, and to meet people where they're at and to bring them love, because when we bring them love, we bring them God, right? Because God is love directly. So the icons kind of redirect my focus to where it needs to be, which is ultimate to him. And even an icon of Christ, I don't worship the wood or the paint or anything like that. It's a reminder, and it points me in the right direction and gives me something tangible, because we're tangible beings, right? We're made with senses, and so we use our senses to worship God. And in this case, it's using the sense of sight and beauty, because this one in particular, you can't see it well. It is so beautiful, and it's a collection of healers, which is appropriate because I'm a massage therapist. And so when I'm struggling, I look at this icon and say, how did you guys do it? How did you continue serving people with your bodies and your hands and your intellect and love God at the same time and not get sucked into the work that you're doing? So those sorts of things.
Yeah, and I think another aspect with icons is twofold that come to mind, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. But I think one aspect is that whether or not we accept icons intellectually and approve of them, we're surrounded in a world that has icons, not necessarily in the same manner of the Orthodox icons, but on billboards, in malls, in
Yeah.
advertisements all over. There are images that we're looking at, and
Yeah.
these are portraying, one way or the other, an ideal version of life. Little boys and girls put up posters on the wall of people
Exactly.
they want to emulate. And
Yeah.
so this is a very natural human thing that's, I think, inescapable. The other facet of that that's really fascinating from a psychological perspective is they've done experiments where they change the image that's shown to people and measure how that changes their actions in the real world. And so,
Oh,
to give a
interesting.
specific example that's really fascinating, that psychologist Daniel Kahneman talks about, he went into a workplace, or at least this was a study done that he references. It was a workplace, it was sort of honor system where you had to contribute to the meals or the food that was there. And one week they would put a set of eyes that were looking,
Oh,
and they have a little note asking to donate. And then another week they just put a vase of flowers. And what they found was that there was a massive increase in the amount that people gave when there were these eyes that were looking, which
really?
was really fascinating because no one would consciously recognize that their attitudes and actions were altered because of this thing. It was happening below the conscious level in the subconscious,
Huh.
but they could prove that it was actually happening and correlated with this image. And so when I think about icons, I think, well, these are things that are pointing us towards God. And we might not know how to intellectually rationalize it and say exactly how it's changing us, but we do trust that these have been used in the church for
Yeah.
a long time,
Yeah.
that the church has produced good people. And so we're subjecting ourselves to that in
Yeah.
the hope that we're going to be changed in some way. So I find that really persuasive for icons. And then on the other hand, with the Old Testament verse, when you read that, say the prohibition against any images, it's really fascinating to me that if you read the description of the temple that's constructed, it's full of images.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
Ark of the Covenant has these cherubim on either side, and people would bow down and they would worship God. And so I think that when people quote that verse, they should wonder, is it the verse itself that's the problem, or is it the interpretation
Yeah.
of the verse? Because in the actual story, it seems like images aren't actually the main problem there.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And then it almost becomes pharisaical that, well, like I think it's if I'm not mistaken, the Muslim practice is no images at all, even of their leaders. Nothing is on any of the walls at all. At least that was the case when we visited uh, a temple many years ago, uh, and how different that is. And I I I know that's that interpretation of no images whatsoever.
So, with the Mother of God or the Theotokos, it sounds like the main objection or the issue was some of the Catholic communities you're part of, where they were overemphasizing her, and so you were afraid of that happening if you started to kiss an image of her, and you were very cautious. Is that the main hesitation that you had?
Yeah, that's a part of it. And I think from the way I grew up, I I I don't I try really hard to lean away from honoring people too much, um, which kind of sounds mean. There are people I deeply respect, but I'm cautious about how I speak about them because I don't want to be mistaken for worshiping them. As one person once made a comment, "Oh wow, you really worship that person." I'm like, "No, I don't." And then I have to think about it. Do I worship them? Do I honor them more than is appropriate? And so I check that because I don't I don't know. I mean those are my own things. So I think that caution that I have with people in general feeds into my caution with people who are highly revered, and maybe to the point where it can look like or feel like worship. It's possible I don't even truly in the core of my being know what that word means. So and I'm just trying to protect myself for judgment day and say, well, I really tried not to worship anyone except you. I don't know if I did it, but so there might be a little bit of that wound into it, and as well as my experience with the Catholic people I was interacting with at the time.
Well, and let me float another idea by you and
Yeah.
just see what you think of it. Sometimes when I think about the Virgin Mary or the Theotokos, she is the ideal disciple in many respects because she bears Christ, she puts on Christ. There's all these references in a way to how scripture talks about being a follower of Christ. And
Yeah.
so when we venerate her and we honor her, I think it's showing the real human possibility of interacting and cooperating with God's grace. And that's what we're hoping to emulate in our own lives. So again, it's not so much, I think, that, I mean, obviously, the Theotokos and the Virgin Mary accomplished amazing things in her life, but I
Yeah.
don't think it's the end there. I think it's meant to change how we live and to show us the real possibility of cooperating with God that we're all called to, so that when we see her and we honor her, it's like, yes, this is what I'm setting my mind on. This is the direction I'm facing.
Right.
And I hope that this will make me that kind of person.
Right. Right. And it's when you don't know anything about her, it's you, you don't even think about her, and yet she's always there, right? Like mothers often are, they're always there, but children tend to forget about them. And we're her children as much as Christ was her, flesh and blood child. We're her children too, in that same respect that she is showing us the way. I think even the services speak of her as showing us the way to Christ. That she is she's the doorway to Christ for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for anyone that's listening that finds themselves in a similar position that you were when you first encountered the Orthodox Church, that's maybe interested and intrigued, but has some hesitations, doesn't know exactly what the next step should be, what would be your advice to someone who's investigating?
Yeah. If you're not scared of them, talk to a priest. They're not that terrifying. Um, that or a deacon. If the priest is too scary, talk to a deacon. That's how we started. If that feels like too much for you, it's always great. I don't think you can really learn about Orthodoxy without experiencing it. So find an Orthodox church, go see what it's like, and talk to its people is really the only way that you can really get an idea. And remembering that the Orthodox Church, as much as it is its people, it's not its people. Sometimes we can have an encounter with an individual that can turn us off a thing. It could just be that person, right? So talk to different people and ask them their stories. Ask them how they got involved in this, and yeah, kind of like what you're doing right now. Just have a conversation with them and see. You don't need to commit to anything. You're just, giving a little bit of time to hearing someone's story. And when I tell it, I get all weird and giggly, right? Because it's still exciting, even though I don't know, what is it, like 16 years later almost. I still get giggly because it's still kind of cool, and I still think I'm a baby. I don't understand half of what I probably should, but that's okay, and I think that's nice to know for people coming in. It's okay not to know. No one has to have all the answers. Figure out what your biggest barriers are and talk to people about them. They might be able to help you either understand or give an explanation for why we do the things we do, like I have with the Theotokos, which really helped my goddaughter, who was recently received into the church. She's got issues with the Theotokos too. I said, great, so do I. Let me help guide you through that. We can walk through this together, and we can struggle through this together and find a path that works for us. And it's all good. It's all good. Don't worry about it,
And would you recommend a certain period of time to investigate the Orthodox Church, just because there are so many different services going on? If someone's not used to the church calendar and how things change from Sunday to Sunday, what would be your advice on the time frame?
I'm a glutton for punishment. So honestly, I would say during our Lent, which is the fast before Easter, we have these midweek services that are called pre-sanctified liturgies. In my opinion, they are one of the most beautiful services we have. That's just, I love them. They're very penitent, so that would be one option. Otherwise, a Saturday night Vespers service. So that's a service that prepares us for Sunday morning liturgy. It's about 45 minutes to an hour, and it kind of it introduces you without overwhelming. Midweek services are sometimes a little bit too short to really get a lot. If you're a morning person and there's a church near you that serves matins, which is our morning prayer service, I do them regularly. I love them. They're so beautiful, and they teach us so much about the church, but mornings are hard to commit to for people. So Saturday evening Vespers would probably be the best for just getting a feel of the space, the music, sort of a kind of flow, and it's got some good listening material to it too.
Yeah, definitely. And also one thing for people to keep in mind if they aren't familiar with the Orthodox Church is that the attendance can really vary throughout those different services in the week. So if you're looking for more of a full-fledged Orthodox service, probably the Sunday gathering is best. You'll get more of a choir there, more of a feel with the music and so forth. Sometimes those other services in the week can be wonderful and beautiful too, but occasionally they are quite sparsely attended. And so if you go to one of those, just bear in mind that there are actually more people that attend the parish than maybe the 5 or 6 that are there on a matins in the middle of the week. So don't be discouraged if that's your first experience too.
Exactly. Yeah. It can be hard for busy families to get to, like, I like Vespers, but evenings are not my thing. I start shutting down way too early, and I never make it to Vespers ever. But I'm a morning person, so matins really work for me, and I'm there as often as my schedule will allow me. So, yeah, like you said, there are a lot more people than it seems. Even on Sundays, there are a lot more people that actually attend the church than we necessarily see. They might just trickle in throughout the service. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I should also just do a shout out to the Pascha service or Easter service, because if anyone's interested in seeing the most exciting part of Orthodoxy in terms of the services, I definitely argue that it's Pascha, because everyone goes to the church late at night. It's this wonderful long service that goes into the wee hours of the morning, and then everyone throughout that season has been abstaining from meat and cheese and these animal products, and then they break their fast afterwards, and usually they've got baskets full of food and wine, and it's the most celebratory service in a church that I've ever been part of.
For sure. And for people who are super diehards and they just want to do a deep dive, you have never seen Easter like the Orthodox do it. So if you're able and willing to, commit yourself to a week of grueling intensive services, you could even come the week before our Easter. We have services all week long. I think we counted there are between 11 and 13 services from Saturday to the end of Sunday on Easter, and they just grow in intensity, and it is so profoundly beautiful, so beautiful and moving. And yeah, you can understand why when we get to Pascha, to the resurrection of Christ, we are celebrating fully from within. It makes so much more sense. Yeah, I love it.
Well, it seems like a wonderful place to end it for today, Macrina. So I just wanted to thank you for your time. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you.
Thanks, Max. Take care. Have a good day.
Hey guys, thanks for checking out that episode of the Orthodox Christian Podcast. I really enjoyed chatting with Macrina. If you guys have any questions about Orthodoxy, there is a link in the description to a Google form, and we will cover those as they come in. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do. We are aiming to get up to 1,000 subscribers. And if you know anyone that would benefit from viewing this episode, please definitely send it to them. And until next time, I hope you have a peaceful week.